Survival horror. It's one of our favorite genres because when you think about the games on the PS1, the PS2, you have Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and variations of those games, but one that often gets talked about but has been completely neglected by Capcom for many years is Dino Crisis. We got about 3 of those games, and the third one was so bad I think everybody just kind of forgot about the series as a whole. But on the PlayStation 1, we actually got 2 excellent games that a lot of people have said for many years, hey, we would love to get some kind of remaster or remake. But when we go all the way back to the original game, is it worth playing in modern times? We're going to be talking about that in another exciting edition of A Cast of the Past, with a brand new episode available on podcast apps every single Sunday and clips throughout the week at youtube.com/A Cast of the Past with yours truly, Juan Velas. I am from Puerto Rico, and joining me, 2 people that love these types of games, so I'm really looking forward to our discussion. From London, Ontario, we have Brickhouse, Keith Hamilton. Now, Keith,
Hi.
in your case, going from Resident Evil and Silent Hill, how familiar were you with these games, especially with this one that came out in 1999?
Well, I played Dino Crisis when it first came out, so I had experienced like the first and second game long before I had ever touched Silent Hill, because like playing Silent Hill for the first time is when we reviewed it on the podcast available in the archives. So I was quite familiar with the style of Dino Crisis, especially with it being a Capcom survival horror game from that time period.
And now we have from Boston, Massachusetts, Mr. Ryan McNulty. Now, you come here way more with the Silent Hill side of things, which
I'm
is
like
a lot
the
more
yin,
suspense.
he's like the yang.
Exactly, it's the healthy combination. So considering that one's pacing and all of that, when you heard about Resident Evil with dinosaurs, that's what a lot of people said. Like, was this something that intrigued you back in the day?
Absolutely. I hadn't heard of the game until a few years ago, but when I heard the concept, I was already a fan of these types of games, so I was like, Resident Evil plus dinosaurs, sign me up. So I've been excited to play this game for quite a while, ever since we decided to do this for the podcast, and definitely that concept was alluring, and I'm glad we got to play it.
Now, for everybody watching and listening, please be part of the conversation by checking out the Discord. We have a lot of people there that have joined recently, thanks to our Twitter posts, our YouTube channel, and all that stuff. You can join that at acastofthepast.com/Discord. And if you're listening to us on anything like Spotify and you want to support, the best way is by leaving that 5-star review on any of the apps. And before we get to the conversation, this is going to be split, because first we'll be talking about Silent Hill, Dino Crisis itself, but then afterwards, because it's inevitable, we are going to kind of compare this first game, right? We're not reviewing the second one, with the Resident Evil and Silent Hill games around that time, and what are some of the pros, some of the cons, the things that maybe this game did better at or worse than those other ones. But for context, this game came out in 1999, July as a matter of fact. The sequel, which also came out on the PS1, came out in September 2000. This got a Metascore of 74%. And what's interesting about this particular game is the lead producer is Shinji Mikami. He's part of Capcom, and this guy, I mean, some of his pedigree include Devil May Cry and Resident Evil 4. I mean, pretty good, right?
Dude's made a good game or two in his day.
Yeah, that's a stacked resume if I've ever seen it.
Exactly. So it's very interesting to see, especially with 4, you know, just how his games developed over time. And we talked about Silent Hill. That came out in 1999. Same thing with Pokemon Snap. We actually have a review of that classic game available now in the archives. But then talking about this game, overall impressions, starting with Keith Hamilton, what you think of your recent playthrough with Dino Crisis 1?
Honestly, I don't like it as much as I remembered liking it. And it's going to be so hard not to say the words Resident Evil when talking about it, but I'm going to try my best.
Give Ryan $1 every time you say RE.
Yeah, we should have like a little
you're getting ready to
swear jar
retire.
for Silent Hill and Resident Evil.
But yeah, like I mentioned, I didn't enjoy it as much as I did back in the day, just because I found the pacing of this game to be a bit a bit not to my liking, because so we're talking about the survival horror genre. That's gonna be my loophole. I'm gonna say the survival horror genre, and you're gonna know what I'm talking about. And when like in the survival horror genre, you have the action side of things, and you have like the more slower, methodical, psychological puzzle style things. And while I was playing Dino Crisis, it felt like it kind of had the worst of both of those styles, plus the tank controls that weren't really refined up to that point. So for that, I wasn't there. I have a lot of dislikes. I don't, looking back on it fondly, I did not have those dislikes before playing this game, but now that I've spent the time with it, I put in the hours, there's a lot of things that I look back on as a con and kind of go, maybe they could have made a better choice there than my original playthrough.
And Ryan, in your case, having played so many, we have gone back and played Resident Evil 2 and 3. We'll be comparing that a little bit later, but then just enjoying this after those other ones. Was this something you enjoyed, and what you think of it?
I did actually enjoy it quite a bit. The thing that surprised me the most was how puzzle heavy it was. I was expecting this to be a very action heavy game, based on just the concept, and you kind of have Jurassic Park in mind where you might be just like gunning down dinosaurs the whole time, but it was much more of you're kind of locked in this facility and you're almost being hunted by the dinosaurs and they will chase you around. So that's a little bit of a unique concept, at least in terms of looking at multiple regular enemies being able to have that ability. So that surprised me with the enemy side of things. And then, like I said, it was much more puzzle heavy than I expected. And there was a lot of very puzzle heavy sections during the game. But overall, I would say I liked it quite a bit. Is it my favorite? That's something we'll get to a little bit later, but it definitely was an enjoyable game.
See, for me, I was conflicted. I think the game, if you ask me what was the first 2 hours for me like, I'd say great game. Afterwards, I'd say it's a very good game. Then it became, hey, it's a good one of those. It's a good one of those. And then towards the end, I'm not going to lie, I was like, can I please just get this over with? Like,
yeah, I was right there with you.
And it's not because it was bad, but I felt nothing. It's like you can sometimes feel when a game doesn't just captivate you. And I feel like in this case, without even having to compare it to other games, the story in this, I just felt nothing. And I would love to know, before we get into a discussion about that, Ryan, could you briefly describe like what is the story of Dino Crisis?
So the story is essentially there is a team. It's called SORT, right? I think it's Special Operations Raid Team. And I don't think they're associated with a specific
so
country.
Lame.
Yeah, they
had to one up it from Stars and just make it a little worse.
Yeah. I don't know if there's like they ever mention like a country because they're just like the government. But anyway, maybe they just wanted to keep it not very political, which I understand. Anyway, what happens is this team previously sent an agent to this island called Ibis Island to investigate this special weapons project. And then that agent reports back that there is a world-renowned scientist, Dr. Kirk, who he discovered is working there. But the issue is that specific doctor was presumed dead about 3 years ago. So people are like, okay, what the heck's going on? So the rest of the team, where the game kind of kicks in, is going to investigate this situation to figure out what's the deal with this doctor and, obtaining him, as well as figuring out what's going on with this special weapons project. So you end up playing as Regina, who is part of that raid team, and you have, I believe, Rick and Gail as your other teammates who you work with throughout the game. And you're just trying to...
Cooper, which was the one that got iced at the beginning.
Cooper gets eaten by a T-Rex like right at the beginning, so
it's always got to happen.
But you got to mention Cooper. Got to give Cooper a shout out.
Never forget.
R.I.P.
Exactly. So Ryan gives like that's a really good base of a discussion, I do feel like for the sake of this, it's not like a huge spoiler, but I guess we do got to spoil a little bit of like one of the plot twists in relation to the story. A lot of you may think to yourself, because I had that question, it's like, okay, so Ryan described all of that, but dinosaurs, like, why? What is the logic behind, how do you justify the dinosaurs going in there? And the whole game, like, that was the question that I had. Throughout the game, they reveal that basically where those facilities are, back in the day, that's where the dinosaurs were. And because of a portal, all this technology stuff happening, it's almost like a time shift where the things from the past are going over to the future. And I thought that was an interesting way to justify that, right? Because it's like, it's not a Jurassic Park. It's not like everybody's aware of dinosaurs. The game's mindset is like, dinosaurs, Keith. Like, what the hell is wrong with that? What did you guys think about that attempt at a plot twist, I guess, as far as to justify how the dinosaurs came to be in that location?
I mean, I was definitely glad it's there. If we're talking about the elements of this game, the story, I would say, is the most throwaway element of it, but I'm glad that they actually took the time to justify the fact that, oh, there's actually a really good reason why the dinosaurs are here, and it's because of the experiments that the scientist, Dr. Kirk, were doing. And, you know, like every scientist in a movie or video game, it just went a little bit wrong, and now we got the raptors everywhere.
Yeah, they couldn't fully rip off Jurassic Park 100% because I think it would have just been a little too on the nose. So I think this worked as a not too complicated. We're not going to just spill exposition over and over again about how these dinosaurs came to be. Instead, we're just going to be like, yep, we got this time warp going on, and things that used to live on this island thousands and thousands of years ago or millions of years ago are now popping up. So I think it worked without getting too ridiculous and convoluted, which I think it was the right approach.
Now, I think to transition a little bit to the gameplay, you know, for 1999, like this was the thing, right? This was the type of game a lot of people enjoyed. The thing that really struck me with this game is, even though the gameplay was not bad, it's a lot of what we are used to. But as both of you said, it really surprised me just how puzzle heavy the game was. Like, if I had to balance out, you know, on a percentage wise, how much action I had in the game as opposed to puzzle, it was like maybe 15% action, because going back, and it's the only comparison I can kind of make, is with these other types of tank control games, not just RE and Silent Hill, you can usually run and outmaneuver the enemy. So that's just what I kept doing. And then it just led to a lot of puzzles to then continue the story, which I don't really care about. And that loop, I just felt kind of empty. Did either one of you have a similar experience?
Yeah, they very much fell into a loop or formula with this game where I felt like, okay, I'm doing the action parts, I'm getting to the room with the puzzle, I did the puzzle, now here's the cutscene. The cutscene's going to take me to some action hallways, now I'm going to find the new puzzle, and I'm going to get to the cutscene. And then really for like a good majority, I would say like at least 75% of the game, that's kind of the loop that they fell into. And though I make it sound like a bad thing, I didn't necessarily hate it. I didn't hate parts of it, because I, like you guys, I enjoyed the puzzles more than the action in this game, because they made some choices with the action, or at least the action part of it, that I think makes it a more difficult game in like the survival horror franchise. And I'm not saying that difficulty is a bad thing, but the fact that they did things like, oh, there's no health bar that you don't get to see. The way that you know if you are bleeding and you need to use a hemostat item is the fact that there's blood dripping on the floor.
Can we just say bleeding sucks? I freaking hate whenever a game has that mechanic. That's one of my biggest pet peeves, because when I got to focus, like, great, I'm bleeding, so even though I have health now, if I don't like patch that up, I'm eventually going to be low health, and having to be mindful of that has always been annoying to me.
I felt like it didn't come up often enough to annoy me. I always had a good amount of health items, But I don't know. I did play on easy, admittedly, so I coasted through the game a little bit more on that. So full disclosure,
I'm gonna give that a solid
Yeah, look, I'm not the survival horror guy, and I played a normal. So
That's
I'm
only
just
because you
saying.
already started a file on normal.
Yeah.
I do wish I played on normal because I think the enemies were a little too easy, and I think one of the core elements of the game was the raptors, and I think that makes them stand out from other series because they're more intelligent than you might expect from a survival horror enemy. So I do think that was a little bit lost on the difficulty there, but I think the puzzles were very solid, and I think they were pretty intricate. Sometimes, opening a door wasn't just open a door. There was a little bit more to it, and I appreciated it. There's one thing on the puzzle element that I didn't like. It wasn't a huge deal, but I can see why other games do things differently, is just because the DDK items are the things that like open up all the doors throughout the facility, and they all have like a letter like A or B or C associated with them. It does get a little confusing, like which door is which letter. They don't throw too many at you at once, but it makes me understand why there's more obtuse items in survival horror games that are keys, because it makes you remember where one thing should go to another place,
Yeah, I know. Especially the way that they chose to do it, because I think the closest example from that time is you could look at is like Metal Gear Solid, because they have like, oh, this is a card key level 1 door. This is a card key level 2. But all of a sudden, like, okay, I just picked up A, B, C, and then I just F somewhere over here. And what happened to D, E, and all of these? So if they would have stuck with like going, basically escalating the alphabet, I think it would have alleviated a lot of the confusion. But I was sitting there for a while like, okay, I just picked up J. What am I supposed to do with this J? And why do I have J already?
Yeah, and I think for me, what really interested me about this game is I would have loved for it to have some kind of editor. And as far as Keith is the perfect person behind the game, right? You're developing the game, and you have this idea. It's like, Keith, just because you have all these puzzle ideas, that doesn't mean they should all be in the video game. And hey, the game did get a sequel, which you've played, Keith, right?
Yes.
And maybe they do address some of that stuff, and maybe we review the game in the future or something like that. But what really annoyed me about it is when you give me so many puzzle pieces, like the doors. I actually appreciated how simple but cool it was. Like, you got to get 2 different items, and then you got to try to figure out what's the word. But then you go to the freaking cranes, and I mean, I wanted to break my head. Like,
I like those.
And it's not that they are bad individually, but collectively as a game, I think it led to me going like, okay, you gotta give me some more action. Because then when you go to the action side, and I'm not saying this is a bad game at all, okay? But we have played Silent Hill, and we're going to be talking about that. We have played Resident Evil and other games that at 1999, we had a pretty good idea of how to do this. I think the gunplay is so lackluster for a game with dinosaurs. Like, okay, let's go back to freaking 1999. If, as a kid, I look at Dino Crisis and the cover, if I had to choose between action and puzzle game, I'm like, this is, oh man, like dinosaurs, action. There is so little action, and the action that is there is just okay. But it is dinosaurs. With other games, you can be more forgiving because the enemies, maybe they're not as maneuverable and flexible, but freaking dinosaurs, and you're easily outrunning them. They are in these narrow hallways, and I don't think the environment actually fit dinosaurs at all.
No, because you have those narrow hallways, and the part that really got to me was the lasers and how you could just sit there and watch the dinosaurs like run into the lasers for hours on end if you really, really wanted to. But I don't know. I in terms of combat, I almost feel like it's a bit of a detriment, the fact that this game is based around dinosaurs, because I was comparing it in my head while playing it to other survival horror games, and
he's trying hard, ladies and gentlemen.
It's so hard. But the fact that some of those games, and it could stand for anything, like there's an echelon of the type of enemies you face. Like you have the easy ones, let's say like a zombie, that like, okay, you put a couple bullets in it and then you move on. And then you kind of have the more difficult enemies that you got to put a little more thought into. When you have a game with dinosaurs and like a raptor, a fast moving, like pretty easy to get to you and take you down raptor is your base enemy, like you're kind of always in that like intense situation. There's no cooldown really with a like a lighter enemy, and they actually do it like later in the game once they introduce things like compies and the little guys in there, but even then they have their own tricks that you have to do it. There was no like action cooldown. You were always just going at this blazing speed, and then the only way that they make it more difficult later in the game is it's a trick that they use in other survival horror games, where instead of the normal color raptor, well, now you're facing the blue one. That does a little more, the numbers are a little different on it.
The enemy variety is bad.
It got to me real bad.
You have raptors, you have blue raptors, you get the little guys, pterodactyls, and then the T-Rex.
And the little guys are pretty much worthless. Like they never hit me, not once.
That like those should be the cooldown enemies. Those are your zombie equivalent, but you don't see them for a long time, and they're very few and far between.
And I think reading into some of it, it was due to like limitations of the game, because initially I read that they wanted to have this game like out in the jungle and to be able to like take down different dinosaurs and stuff, but obviously having to render like all the vegetation and things like this, because this game doesn't use like the pre-rendered backgrounds like we've seen in other games. It's like another game I can't mention because I don't want to put it.
Another
I'll just say
game in the survival horror genre.
Yeah, like Silent Hill also does the fully 3D, but it's fixed camera angle, but everything is like fully 3D. It's not any pre-rendered background. So that's what we have in this game, and they wanted to do that. So a whole outdoor jungle would have just been too much for the game to basically handle. But then I think they wanted to really go above beyond with the enemies, but it's like, how do you fit a stegosaurus inside of a building? You know what I mean? Like, there's not many, like, if you really want to have all the cool dinosaurs everyone knows, it's tough to do all of them, like, indoors and things like that.
Like, isn't a stegosaurus a herbivore? Like, what's the justification of them wanting to kill you?
A triceratops, maybe. Okay, you know, something like that. Like,
Keith,
I guess they could have
question
done mini ones, but...
Do you have any plugs?
Oh, I have a gray one and a red one, but I'm missing a blue one and a green one.
I thought that was for a Cast of the Past After Dark. What are we talking about?
I mean, it depends what kind of plugs you want to talk about.
Let me go get my black one. 1 minute.
And I really do want to play the sequel, because when talking about plugs, for those that haven't played the game, Dino Crisis has a lot of things that maybe other games haven't attempted. And for a game that's so heavy on puzzles, they sure have a lot of elements about the ammo and the items management, because you don't just have a crate, right? You don't just have a box where you can put things in. With Dino Crisis, something that I thought was awesome is that when you get these different plugs in the game that they're left by bodies or things like that, you can get access to a place that has things for health, and that can help you with, stop the bleeding or heal you up. You can mix up items, and I think that's really good. And when you talk about the ammo stuff, you also have like grenade launchers, you have all that ammo. And I love the fact that you can even try to, like, within the system, because it's such a tech-heavy game, it's like, oh, now you can get access to the ammo you had in the previous room or something. I just never found myself really worrying about that. Like, not up until the end of the game was I guess I should dabble into this a little bit. The only things I really used were the health packs, and I would mix that with like the anti stuff, and to make it you could upgrade the med pack so they would also stop the bleeding, and that was cool. But the ammo stuff, and I played it in normal. Maybe if you get like another game mode or something, I just rarely found myself needing to use a lot of this stuff. I don't, Keith, because like Ryan's Mr. Easy here. Keith, in your case, like, did you have any experience with those?
I mean, I think the plug system is cool, especially for like in a lot of those games, it becomes like I'm going to run through a room and I'm going to hit the circle button and eventually my character is going to drop to a knee and, oh, here's some bullets. I think the plug system is cool as like okay, here is the spot that you are going to restock at. But yeah, as far as the mixing stuff, I didn't really do all that much of it. I'm sure there's a good reason for it, but I don't understand the difference between tranquilizer bullets and the normal bullets and stuff like that.
I didn't mess with the tranquilizers too much, except when I was low on ammo, because on easy you could just gun down all these enemies, but you would run out of ammo. They didn't it wasn't like I was stocked, gassed to the gills with ammo here. I was actually finding myself running low at times, but basically the best part about the mixing that I used it for was you could turn some of what was it? Like you said, that aid thing, whatever. You could basically turn non-heal items into like a full recovery if you mixed it with it.
And you even got more items sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. So it definitely was good for, turning something into like a med plus so that you could just fully recover. So that's what I ended up using it for. I didn't really dabble too much in trying to make like the darts or anything like that.
No. So you mentioned, Juan, that you're interested in playing the second one eventually. What if I told you that they threw all of that out the window in the second one and you did nothing like that?
Okay. I'm legit curious to like figure out what that, because a lot of people seem to say better things about the second one than the first. Not that the first one's bad.
Yes, that is accurate.
Okay, so let's have a small conversation here. If you were to pick your favorite thing, starting with Ryan, if you were to say, this was my favorite thing about playing Dino Crisis now, what would you say it was?
I would say probably, I think my favorite thing was the puzzles, because it caught me off guard, and I thought, for the most part, they were more intricate than I expected. Like I said, the crane puzzles might be a pain for some people, but I actually found them to be fun, as well as the puzzles with like the multiple plates where you try and make it like a connecting pattern. I did enjoy those quite a bit. And, some people may not like this, but the puzzle, this is very like grab a pen and paper type of game where you want to write stuff down. And some people may not like that, but it's one of those things that it kind of takes you back to when you're a kid, and you don't have games like that anymore. So it's kind of more of like a nostalgia thing, but I really enjoyed the puzzles. Like I said, I wasn't expecting it at all, so that part was kind of a nice surprise.
Mm-hmm. I have to agree, where I liked when we were going through the gameplay loop, I liked the part where I finally got to the puzzle part of it before the cutscene. And the fact that there's a couple of repeat puzzles, but they do a pretty good job of keeping it fresh puzzle-wise, where you're not really running into the same thing over and over and over again. And there are a couple that really gave me problems. I have never ever been good at puzzles where you have to remember, the Simon puzzles where you have to remember exactly the order that things go in. My brain isn't built that way. And conveniently, it was the one that you only have limited tries on. And I found myself quite it was quite the challenge in some instances to actually sit down and, like you said, pull up a note on my phone and work through everything and take the time to enjoy the puzzles. I found that to be a nice counteract and a nice cool down to the action, which was very much one note in this game.
Yeah, for me, I'd actually have to agree with the whole note-taking part. The keys and you having to figure out the words. I really enjoy that stuff because, as Ryan mentioned, it's so 90s, right? That is such a 90s thing, because Nowadays, even with Breath of the Wild and some games that initially you don't get a lot of information, you can just take a picture with your phone. Like, it's so easy to cheat around the system where when you put yourself in 1999, you're like, you couldn't just pull out your phone and be like, I'm lost here. I don't have the strategy guide.
You can't
where
just
do I go?
Google Dino Crisis puzzle.
But I feel like even games of today, there's almost no game that even requires that in any capacity. If there was something like, if you see a code in a game today, I feel like it just gets added to like your in-game notebook or something like that. So you can just reference it in-game. You know what I mean?
I wish that I could build a time capsule and send you back to when Fez was first released on the Xbox 360, because that would be your jam so hard. Because there was like this 2-week period where the game has its own language, and like people were trying to decipher it and figure out the puzzles in that game. Like I wish I could do that. It has nothing to do with Dino Crisis, but this is like a me to you thing.
It got very personal now, Keith.
Yeah,
like, that was
sorry.
Beautiful, man. That was beautiful. Another thing that I liked about the game is, even though you're kind of like a mission squad, right? It's like, go there, try to figure out, is this scientist alive? You're kind of like an investigator. And you can do little things like scan people's fingerprints. And even sometimes you'll see a dead body. My instinct was like, well, just in case, let me just scan it. And not every time it worked, but I like that, because some games, I hate it when they introduce a mechanic and you use it for that one specific thing, because it just feels flawed. It's like, come on, man, at least make me feel acclimated, right? And I think that's good. And then the other thing, and I mean, you can let me know, Keith, if they double down on that or not on the second one, because they didn't do it a lot here, is you do have some decision making. I don't know if it actually matters too much, but even towards the end of the game, when you eventually have to escape the building, I felt the pressure of, okay, here's kind of like the more passive approach, but if I mess that up, I got to take the other one. So do I just go with the action-oriented route? And having to sit down and think about not what would Juan do, but Regina, because the character is pretty outspoken compared to like other games where the protagonist is fairly silent. I feel like I can understand Regina and the conflicts that she has with some of the characters, and I really thought that was good. I don't know if you guys related with that.
I really like the choices. I screwed up on them, but I really like that in some instances you could choose a more puzzle heavy route or a more action route. And the only thing is, towards the end of the game, I think it was like the second to last decision, I kind of just sided with the character that, like, story-wise, I wanted to side with, but immediately regretted it, because I was like, at that point, I needed a little bit of a break from the puzzles, because I think I had just done, like, one of the bigger puzzles in the game. And I just felt like I kind of just would have rather done the action sequence, and I selected the puzzle one, and I was kind of like annoyed with myself because I was like, oh, I'm a little bit over this right now. But then at the end of the game, it definitely was no longer like a gameplay decision. I was wanting to, instead of just abandoning the mission and trying to get the hell out, I was like, no, I kind of want to see this mission through, and siding with Gale, who is more of like the... Rick, the control guy, is definitely seems he's the more likable character, and he's more of like your friend.
Yeah,
and
methodical.
Then Gale, and even though Gale, he feels like he's in the wrong most of the time, I kind of was siding with him and like, I want to see this through. I don't want to just have a crappy ending to
committed.
This game. Yeah, he was committed, and I was like, I don't want to get the worst ending in the game, so let's see what happens.
Yeah, it was. I liked it a lot, and it was. I enjoy it for less of what it did in the Dino Crisis series, and more of how they kind of cherry pick elements from it and used it in other survival horror games.
Keith's dying to get to the second part.
I'm just listening to Keith, I'm like, man, that is
He's
some
like,
wording.
I feel like he's like physically in pain because he can't say
oh
Resident
my
Evil.
god, it's so hard.
But before we get to that conversation, we have the one defining question, and the reason that we played this game, recently, which is, forget about when this game came out. We played it in 2021. If somebody was listening and was like, Keith, after you played it, after you experienced it, would you suggest, forget about a remake or a remaster, we're talking about this version, do you think somebody should play it?
I think they should. This is a very much a fans of the genre should check out this game style thing, where I think that this game has its own merits, but I would also recommend like 5 games before it. And once you go through all of those games, I would even recommend another Dino Crisis game before this game. So once you kind of go through all of those, and then it's a very much like you should check this out somewhere in the middle of the survival horror list.
Okay, that's a pretty logical way of thinking about it. What about you, Mr. McNulty?
So is Dino Crisis worth playing in 2021 or 2021?
Oh, yeah.
I would actually side with Keith on if you are a fan of the genre, and by genre, I mean PS1 and early PS2 survival horror, because these games are dated, they're clunky, but there is a charm to them. If you've never tried out the genre, I do think Dino Crisis is a good starting point. It's not something where the lore is going to overwhelm you, and it's not as intimidating maybe to get into as some other series. So I think it actually is a good starting point. And if you enjoy this game, yeah, sure, there's definitely better games out there, but I don't think it's the worst place to start either. But yeah, keep in mind it's going to be very dated. So if you're used to only modern games, there's a decent chance that it might just be too clunky for you.
See, for me, I went into Dino Crisis with a pretty casual perspective. As somebody that I enjoy this genre, but I don't live for this genre. Like, survival horrors may be in my top 6 favorite genres, not top 5. And I gotta say that if you love it, kind of like what you guys talked about, sure, play it. But otherwise, if you're curious about the PS1 library, if you just want to think to yourself like, okay, hey, I never played PS1 games. I've heard about this Dino Crisis. You know, we got the remakes for Resident Evil 2 and all that stuff. We don't have anything for this. I don't think I could suggest it because it's called Dino Crisis. Like, it is literally in the name.
It is a crisis of dinosaurs.
Exactly. There's a crisis, but the dinosaurs are the least important part of it. They are so... You could swap the dinosaurs with freaking anything else, and the story wouldn't change. And I feel like for
Muppet Crisis.
What?
I said Muppet Crisis.
Yeah, I would play that 10 more times. It would be amazing. Am I saying this game's bad? Hell no. It's actually a very, very, very solid game. I think it is the definition of a solid game. The puzzles are super serviceable. They're enjoyable. There's a lot of things, and we'll talk about the pros and the cons in the second part of this episode, right? When compared to other games. But never did I feel, okay, I am so happy that, like, this is it. This is replacing, you know, if I have a list of PS1 games, right? And these are the 10 that I recommend. Would Dino Crisis replace any of them? The answer is no. Like, it's undoubtedly, like, there's no reason you should play this over even like a Medieval, because that's a unique game. Should you play this over Resident Evil or anything like that? No. Do I think, now, if the question was, should they remake this? Abso-freaking-lutely. Because I think this is the type of game that you mentioned, Ryan. A lot of the reasons they had to narrow the game down was because of technical limitations. So I would love to see this game be reimagined and all of that. I think it could be freaking awesome, especially considering, like, if you do like a third-person shot, I can imagine it's like, do you go for the tail? Kind of like a Dead Space. I think it would feel a lot like Dead Space if you think about it. I don't know if... Yeah, Keith, you played Dead Space, right?
Yeah, I think that's a very good comparison because the enemies in Dead Space are very much like the dinosaurs in this game, just with the benefit of having like more powerful technology behind them. Like, it's very rare that you're facing a slow enemy in Dead Space, but because you have the tools to deal with them and you're not fighting against tank controls, it feels a little less one note. So yeah, I'm actually on board with you 100%. I think there's room for this to be remade in the future. I know the easy answer is like, oh, just do what you did with the RE2 remake because that's one of the greatest games ever. But honestly, I don't think it would be a bad thing.
Hey, thanks for checking out the video. If you liked it, please consider subscribing, and we are also available on podcast feeds, so search the name, click on the Sword and Stone, and enjoy a brand new episode every single Sunday.